the schedule for tomorrow morning, and you can see that one slot has miraculously come free, the one at 8:30. So if anybody wants to come and see us. Is there any questions? No questions. Good. Because I don't know the answers in here. Yeah, you can come.
Okay. Am I live?
Is this yours?
Okay, yeah.
Now you have the schedules on your screen.
Hi, it looks as if we've dwindled down to the guys that are really insisting on finishing now. But I do believe that the other guys will join us as time goes by. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to really deal with what you're going to do with the assignment 1 that you're going to put as a problem statement. We're also going to talk a little bit about it for those of you that are not quite certain. And we are going to ask everybody to join in the conversation the normal way. Fall asleep and you are guaranteed to share. Okay. You've heard us talk about the golden thread regularly. So I'm going to explain a little bit about that. We're also going to be dealing with the golden anchor, what a problem should have. We go through that again, looking at how you introduce a problem. Then we're going to really look at stating the problem and the aim, and finding your title, the aim and geographical demarcation. Now, remember, the purpose of your proposal, if you look at your 150 word, which is just a rough idea of a proposal, and it's a first version, the purpose of that is so that a contract can be entered between you and the university. So the moment you've given that 150 word proposal to the university, they can look at this and they can say, okay, we can deal with this idea and you can enroll. Now most of you have either done it or are in the process of doing that 150 word. Who of you have not yet done it? Okay. It's not going to be really, I mean at this point you should be able to spin 150 words about what you want to do, no problems whatsoever.
In your sleep.
In your sleep. You just basically have to say more or less in what context. You've got to say what your problem is and a vague idea of how you're going to actually do the research on your research design. Few references, I don't think you even have to have references. Nothing. So you start with your first, and for those of you that haven't done the 150 words, context, problem, and bit of introduction to your problem statement, and 150 words will be done. But what you're now going to do is when you hand in your next proposal, for some of you, that may be the point that you only get assigned a permanent supervisor. Once again, it's the basis of a contract. And what the university wants to be able to make, it wants to make a decision that you know. And they want to base it on the fact that you know what you're going to do. That what you're going to do is likely to lead to a successful completion of a degree. You have a solid, that you're familiar and comfortable with the competent in your field of discipline. You have a solid and practical plan about how you're going to do it, and you're not likely to go and violate the ethical processes. Now, if you look at it, and you've probably all seen the framework for what a proposal should be, and this is just a cut and paste out of it. It's all on the wiki, isn't it? Very simple. This is what you have to have. There's one difference now. At one point they used to say ethical considerations if applicable. Unfortunately for all of you, ethical considerations is now going to be applicable because we're going to go through a formal ethical clearance process. So what you have to do is the 12 pages, and we're going to next week discuss a little bit more on how you spread the words between those 12 pages. You'll introduce the problem, you'll make your problem statement, you're going to talk about the objectives, Remember the objectives, the aim, and we'll discuss that. Your questions, hypothesis, the kind of things that you should be able to do after assignment 3. You're going to do a conceptualization that we'll also deal with next week. You're going to discuss the geographical demarcation, your methodology. Now what you'll see in here is that what they want as part of your methodology is really the methodology of your literature review and some detail. So you are going to do a complete literature review, and that document will form an annexure to your proposal. You don't have to write everything in there, it will just form an annexure to your proposal. And that will actually show to your audience that you are very familiar with this theoretical environment and that you have read. We are actually foreseeing that this is going to become a bigger and bigger part of what you need to do, so that you can't only put a proposal together without having read. Now, for who of you think that you could have put a proposal together without reading the amount that you've read so far? You could have put a proposal together, but you're going to change your mind several times about it as you proceed. So we want you to read enough so that you have a very, very good idea that what you're going to start off with, that you can complete this. We don't want you to waste time. Because every time that you find out the things that you're now finding out while you're busy in the process of executing the research, you've got to start again. Adds a 6 months to your research, adds a year to your research, totally break your speed, all of those things. So we don't want you to go through that. Then how are you going to do your empirical study? That's a research design that we have spoken about, and we will continue to talk about that different times. Around your limitations, delineations kind of thing. Ethical considerations, how are you going to do record? So if you look at ethical issues, record keeping is a part of the ethical issues, but it's very, very important for you to understand what are you going to do with the data that you gathered. Say, for example, you make a tape recorder, recording, how are you going to keep it? If you actually bring in questionnaires, because remember, there is an obligation on you to have all your original data available for a significant time after, I think it's 5 to 10 years. 5 years after you've handed in your document and it's been examined, that original data should be accessible and people should have access to it to be able to verify certain things. So how are you going to keep it? If you have ethical considerations, there's going to be a likelihood that you have to work out what you can store, in what way you're going to store it. Because that pack of evidence that is then available should be available to anybody that wants to look at the study. Okay? So it's really very important. Then your provisional chapters. Basically, they want your chapters in the project plan. We're going to go a little bit deeper because there's a lot more to this project plan, and if you actually have understood what you've got to do and allow for the painful time of editing and things that doesn't really align with your chapters, you will have a better chance of succeeding. Then looking at the budget, all of this bottom end is about your project plan of how you're going to do your research. Then dissemination. Now, for people that are doing the doctorates, what's going to be a requirement for you? 1 article in a journal. Two now in a journal. Yeah. Now, you've all had fun reading these journals, articles, isn't it? We've spoken about the fact that you're joining a conversation. There's a massive conversation going on around a certain topic that you're working. There may be more than one. It may not be precise in your area. And initially what you're doing is you're finding out about this conversation so that you can actually follow it and know where it's going and contribute something. At a doctoral level, you should be able to join that conversation. And it should be recognized that you have now joined this conversation, and the way this is recognized is by accepting that you have something to say in an academic forum. So that's why it's so important. So in your dissemination, if you want to complete your whole thesis and then start with your article, I don't think that's the cleverest idea. I think that you want to proceed with them on the way so that while you're waiting for something, you can carry on. Or you'll have your whole thesis examined and you'll be hanging around for another year or two until such time as you get your degree. So we've got to make very sure that you understand your dissemination plan. At the doctoral level, it is also quite likely that you will be participating in some conferences. Local or international, it depends on whether you work for the university and get the funding or not. And even at the master's level, we're looking at dissemination. Professor Barry was with me today in examinations of honors level research work that we know that we'll get publications out of it. So we are very, very certain that a significant portion of the master's work that is coming out of here should be able to be disseminated at conferences or in papers as well. So just because I haven't said masters up to now doesn't mean that you are not also going to be in that step. And getting into that practice is what's going to make sure that if you've got the impetus, when you finish your masters, you can actually go and do your doctoral level.
Okay, can I just say something? At this university for master's level, you have to show evidence that you have submitted a paper to a journal.
Okay, so you actually have to write the thing.
And you have to send it to the journal and you have to get a letter back from the journal saying that they have received your paper. You don't have to have it published. But so if you're going to go to that trouble, you might as well have it published.
Okay. And if you've had it published, if you're ready, if you're up to speed at the end of your masters, you will not have to sit where a number of these doctoral candidates have to start polishing up their knowledge so that they can go on to a doctorate level. You'll be ready and you'll be flying. So we want you to be flying. We're not talking here, we're talking to two levels of doctoral candidates, the ones that's in it now and the ones that will be in it in 2 years' time. Okay, don't open your eyes so wide. This is serious, guys. It's a very, very important imperative for South Africa's development plans to increase our doctoral candidates significantly. Okay? And we want them to come from here. And we know that you're all capable of going there. Okay. The parts of this proposal that you can now start drafting on as you do your assignments. You are doing 5 assignments. Those 5 assignments don't just go 1, 2, 3, 4 and miraculously they become a proposal. That is the thinking work and some of the writing work that you will be transferring into your proposal. Okay. So assignment 1, which you are now redoing, and as most of those that we've discussed with have seen that we've increased that first bit about the context significantly through your discussion, that assignment 1 talks at least to those 4 points. If you've done it, you can do the introduction. You can do your problem statement. You can actually say what's the aim or the purpose of the study, not the objective so much because those will follow after you've done assignment 3. And certainly you can talk about the geographical demarcation. And remember that last bit about the bibliography, the references, you'll be quite okay there as well. So let's talk about how you do it.
Sorry, can you just at this stage tell them what's the difference between a bibliography
Okay.
and references?
What's a bibliography? If any one of you just hand in a bibliography.
It includes things you didn't cite.
Okay. It say what you've read. So if you haven't read thoroughly, as I know that you've done, what you've done in assignment 2 is a bibliography. You've not really started referring to it, you haven't engaged with it, and you haven't referred to it exactly. So a bibliography, in this case, if you do a half-washed affair, might be what you plan to read and what you've scanned over so far. You've passed that at assignment 2. Okay? Your references will be the things that you have used in that proposal or in the annexure that's your detailed literature review and that you have referred to. Okay. So you'll be able to talk about that as well. All of you now know how to do referencing? Has anybody got a problem with referencing? Who of you have started attempting assignment 4? The literature review. Oh, carefulness. You have started. I know of a number of you that have started, but are too scared to say anything before I make you talk. Is that? So that's where it will be coming in. Okay. You've all seen this model. Basically what it is, it's a U model. You start at the left top, you do your problem area, do your research question, structure those things, and then you support it by literature review, by evidence from empirical environment, you analyze and you answer your questions, and you do your contribution. What that means is if you have done assignment 1 to 5 completely, you have a roadmap of how you're going to pull that data together or the information from reality, how you're going to analyze it, and how you're going to go about answering that. So if you've done these assignments properly, you only have to complete your research design in detail. Of course, keep updating your literature review all the time. Gather your data, analyze your data, pull it together to put the answer, and contribute. So a lot of your work, and in fact the guideline is that about 30% of your total work should be done by the time that you finish your proposal. That assumes a proposal with a fair intensity in your literature review. So you're not quite halfway there, but you are going to be very close to getting to that point. So this, you've all seen it, but what does it mean? Who of you have not heard the word golden thread yet? The nastiest thing that can be said about your work as it comes back is, we cannot see the golden thread. What that means, if I start at the beginning, I read through it, I get lost. I cannot, it doesn't follow, I don't start and end where I'm supposed to be. Now what this U model is supposed to be doing, and now I've changed the colors. In your process that you're continuously working through your work, remember top left, chapter 1, detailed literature review, chapter 2, how to get your empirical evidence, chapter 3, answering the questions, results and analysis, chapter 4, conclusion and recommendation is chapter 5. So as you're working with them and continuously realizing that you have to keep on adjusting the things, you are working to get that golden thread, to make sure that when your audience start reading, read through your work, they know where you are and where you're going all the way, they can follow you, and at the end you are actually reaching the aim of your research. So that is very, very important. You're going to be in this loop until the time that you've finished and everything is stabilized. You're going to cut it open at the bottom, at the top, and now it's going to be a linear document. People are going to read it and they're going to be so impressed with you because it seems so logical. All the feelings that you have when you read somebody else's dissertation, when you read somebody else's thesis, it seems so logical, and we want the document to read logically. That is why it's so confusing to start with your research. You read what somebody else has done, and you can't, how do they get there? Yes. It's messy in the middle. We know it's messy in the middle. We just pretend. Now, after we've gone through, we can lift our eyes and say, no, it's so logical. It's actually not that difficult, isn't it? And you lift your eye and you look really, really senior when you talk to other people. But if you've made sure that in this cycling, in this messing, you keep on keeping it aligned. You have your research problem area, research questions, the topic, chapter 1. You have your chapter 2 literature review. You have your research design, chapter 3. You've got your analysis, and you've got your conclusion and recommendations. All of them nicely laid. That is what we want with your golden thread. So there's no ways that you can maintain a golden thread if you start working on the one side, think I've finished chapter 1, think I've finished chapter 2, and things change. Is there any one of you that has exactly the same problem that you thought you were starting with? Can't. As you learn more, you start moving this and you get it aligned and you get it to work and that you can actually be able to answer it. So as you change, if you start with chapter 1, when you have an idea of what you're going to do, you do your literature review, and then you find out some more things. In your research design, you find out some more things, but you never go and fix the rest. You are going to lose, by the end of chapter 5, you are totally going to lose your golden thread. So you've got to be fiddling with it all the time. Okay, now let's talk about how you're going to write that golden thread in your proposal. In your proposal, it's sort of a silver thread. It's a golden thread as far as we know it now. But in your final document, you are going to probably fiddle a little bit more with it so that you can get it through. Your research problem, what assignment 1 is all about and why we want you to resubmit it and sit with your supervisor so we can get it as fixed as possible, is actually the anchor of this golden thread. Everything goes around that research problem. That is the aim of your research. Your research problem has to be very, very solidly considered, including the practicalities of how you're going to be answering, including whether you know there's enough literature to work on it. And probably after you've done some of assignment 3, you are now in a position to get a very good grip on your research problem. We know it may still change a little bit, but not spectacularly. Now, what is important is that everything is anchored in it. From top to bottom, that little red line is your golden thread. But your research problem is also the words that you're going to do your title and your aim about. Remember, you've got to get your aim. We'll get to this again. Now, remember the bit when I ask you every time, what's your problem? Who of you are not comfortable that you have a fairly good grasp on what your research problem is now? There's somebody still, except for people that have 2. There's people that have to still trade off. But is everybody who's a little bit uncomfortable about this research problem? It's quietness. I can see that quietness. Are you still a bit uncomfortable with that? You've got an appointment for tomorrow.
No, I was with my supervisor today.
Okay. You think it's...
Does that confuse you or make you happy?
Confused me. But I had to redo some of the stuff, but it just changed the wording.
A lot of it is about wording, and a lot is phrasing it. Now, we can give you general guidelines. We can tell you what the overall way doing it is. But in everybody's single discipline, there is a little bit of a, we prefer it to be phrased exactly like that. We want it to be put like that. Or is it more than that?
It was more on a title.
Okay, we'll get to the title now.
Yeah, but then she wanted me to do my program statement based on the title.
Or you do your title based on the problem statement. You can change your title over and over and over and over. You can change your title. You can change your title until the day that you hand in.
I even had it after that.
You can even change it after that. So your title is not cast in stone. Your title, your initial title, is probably formulated based on that 150-word proposal that you put together, when you more or less had an idea where you're going to play. So ultimately, your title reflects it. We'll talk about that. Let's go through that. So the first thing, a number of you have had this fun. Is this problem that I want to investigate relevant to my discipline? For some of you, it was very simple. Can I do this problem in this department? Okay. And there's some of you that had to actually deal with this, saying, you know, the problem I really want to research, the department in which I'm registered don't want to go there. And there's nothing wrong with it. A lot of it deals with where you have come up from a B.Tech level, from an M.Tech level. It's very, very difficult to move focus later. So if you've come up with something in marketing, to now suddenly say you want to do something in project management is going to be difficult. So it's very, very important, and I hope that most of you have now got a problem that's relevant to your discipline and the department in which you are. The next one is it real and can it be substantiated? In other words, do I have the evidence to convince somebody that this is really a problem worth researching? At a master's level, can I contribute a little bit to the body of knowledge? Can I contribute to what we know? At a doctoral level, can I prove absolutely that this knowledge doesn't exist? So hopefully you've now read and you've started seeing what exists and where it exists so that you can aim for that little bit that is yours alone. If you've got that problem carefully defined, your title, which is a reflection of your problem, gets registered. And then you've demarcated for the time being. Maybe you'll fiddle with it again, but that title that you register demarcates your area and where you will be doing your research. Can it contribute to the body of knowledge? We've spoken about that. Who owns the problem? When you start looking at how can you actually, what motivates this research? Where will you contribute? And at the end where you want to say, so wow, I'm the greatest thing, to whom have you contributed? There is a very, very serious drive to make sure that the research work that you are doing have some contribution. Okay? You've expanded the body of knowledge, but what are you going to do with that? Most of you are in management science, so the practical use of whatever you're going to be working on in management is important. And when we start looking at that, you'll be talking about this is the theoretical applications, recommendations, contributions, and this is the practical to the management field. So who owns the problem? Where are you going to start getting information? And if there are more than one owner, do they actually agree about this problem? Because if they do not agree about this problem, you basically have to tap in more than one conversation to actually argue why you are going to choose one version of the problem, or what version are you going to talk about. Remember, everybody, you give me a problem area, the two of us sit there, and within a few minutes we'll be able to find you 2 or 3 different problems in that problem area. Most of all, if you haven't demarcated your own problem clearly, we will just claim one that's interesting for us. You've got to choose your problem. It's very, very important. You've got to know where you're contributing, etc. Then, most of you, why are you doing that? You're probably studying either because it's important in your work, in your career that you've chosen, or because you want to realize yourself. You want to be able to say, I'm Dr. So-and-so, or I've got a master's degree. What else can you get out of it? Doing this research, will it be useful to your CV? Can it help you, the specific topic that you're working, the specific problem that you're looking at? Will it position yourself at work? You want to get a problem that you can actually get as many benefits out as possible. I think most of you have actually gotten to problems now that you're starting to feel comfortable about. Then, can I live with this problem? I think there's a number of you that are already feeling vaguely bored with your problem, isn't it? You've read so much about it. Now, in a few years, you're going to be so close to that problem, it's just not really, it's not true. So you want to retain enthusiasm. And that's why we want you to structure your whole research as early as possible so that in the future you just can continue executing it. You don't have to regain all the enthusiasm, the energy that you have now to get there. But you want to live with that problem. You don't want to run screaming if somebody talks about that problem later. And then, can I attract a suitable supervisor? Those of you that have a supervisor would have been guided not only in the discipline, but by your supervisor where to go start looking for a problem. Those of you that have not yet got a supervisor want to have a problem that will get you the kind of supervisor you want. Straightforward. If you are sitting with a problem that doesn't meet these criteria, you may have to think about it again. So when you write up your research problem, and assignment 1 will now be pretty formal, we more or less convinced that this is the problem that we're going to build our proposal around. Maybe we'll fiddle with it later. Does it meet these criteria? Does this make more sense than the first time when I said this? Okay. Remember a few weeks ago when I was trying to tell you, and you were looking at me in utter shock and horror. Do you know how far you've come? Because a good problem is at the heart of your work. The moment you've grasped that problem, and at the doctoral level you know it's at the level, the rest, you've got to find out how to solve the problem, that's all. But finding that problem is actually sometimes really, really problematic for people. So, you're working in your domain, you've worked out what can substantiate it empirically, from any other document that's reputable or any other sources that are reputable. You've worked out how to substantiate from the body of knowledge. You've actually worked, and how many, there's many of you that we said, are you trying to do 1 doctorate or 2? There's some of you that really tried about 3 or 4 master's degree at one go, isn't it? Yes? Now, you've got it, and you had to trade off. Because ultimately, you want to be able to do this. You don't want to just write around and maybe one day have a little bit to write about it. You want to get this degree. So we choose a problem that we can do. We do trade-offs between the size, between exactly, we may not be actually doing the problem that we wanted to do in the beginning, but it's one that we can actually address. And you're happy. That is what we want you to be able to do at assignment 1. Now you've done it. The first time it was really, really scary. You've done it again. And this is now your 3rd opportunity. So hopefully you are much more comfortable about this and you know that you can actually put it together. 3rd time lucky. But it's a process, guys. This doesn't happen magically. If you sit back and you think of what you thought about this a while ago, you've come a very, very long way. And we can clearly see it when we talk with you. You're starting to use the right vocabulary. You are talking the way that an academic person should be talking about that problem. So getting there. Now the introduction. The first bit, when somebody opens your document, whether it's now the proposal or your final document, you want them to read it. When I look at examination, I take the document, I read the introduction, I read the conclusion, I read the references, and then I may read the middle. So the image that you create in somebody's mind with the very, very first part of your document is really important. You want people to start reading this and you want to convince them, remember what's a proposal? That you know what you're talking about, that this is a real problem and that it's at the right level. Okay. So we've got a certain way. For those, some of you, we've already spoken about it. Your very first sentence that you put in your introduction is not the aim of this research, is not this guy said something. The very, very first line is something that attracts people's attention. It's a hook. It gives you a hook that makes people read it, say, wow. But it is aligned with your research problem. So you're probably going to make a statement that gives any reader an indication about where your research problem is going to be. So when they read it, you stamp the very, very beginning of your golden thread. When you have your problem, you can start working out, and you can now say, what is the first word that I use? Then you will lead your reader to the problem. When your reader opens that document, all you want them to say, yes, I agree. Next thing, this is so, this is true. Every little bit that they read, they must agree with. So you must convince them. If I say a first sentence, I say a second sentence, that this is supported, there's evidence for this. And you're really leading your reader through an argument so that by the time they get to the research problem, they fully agree with you that this is the research problem that you want to work on. Okay. Now, how do we get there? And in between, you substantiate. Remember when we spoke about why you probably won't find literature about the pink ping pong balls in China? Where do you get the literature? You want to convince your audience. You may find something that really, really say, this is a problem, I refer, perfect. But you want to convince and introduce your reader. One of the things that's really important, that you have to bring in the concepts that you're going to use in the rest of your research. This is not a mystery novel. You don't want to surprise your reader halfway. Readers of academic work don't like that kind of surprises. That you should start and you should make, when you introduce something, it must look logical. It must look as if it belongs here. So that first bit, you try and introduce the concepts that you'll be talking about later. If you're going to talk about factors that affect people's satisfaction, you have to use some words that indicate that you're going to look at factors that leads to satisfaction, or what influences satisfaction. Okay. You must convince your audience, your reader, that this is a great problem. So, you start with your golden hook. Then you sit down. Before you start writing, you make a list. You can use a mental map, you can use a rich picture, you can use flow diagram, you can use anything you want to. But you have to make in your mind, what is it that you have to tell your audience, your reader, so that they will agree that this is a problem. Okay, now who am I going to target? There, she's sleeping, I see her. Okay, what's your research problem? Yes. What's your research problem? Have you got one yet? Yes, you. The lady in the golden jacket, yes. Okay, while she recovers a little bit, what's your research problem? You.
Yeah. My research problem is students who are staying long in the system and not completing.
Okay. She's given a topic there. The problem is that students are staying in the system and not completing, and we don't know why. This leads to the fact that we cannot address it appropriately. Okay? So the problem, remember, is a statement. They stay in there. We don't know why fully. Okay? So we need to, our aim is to understand why, and there's consequences. What things do you need to tell people to convince them that this is a problem? What things do you need to tell them about?
Actually, like it's targeted at very high level institutional decision makers to say to them it might affect our graduation
Okay, so she has to convince them and convince the high-level author people in this environment that it affects the graduation. So what do you need to do? You've got to get some evidence there. You've got to probably analyze a little bit of what your enrollment figures are. How many people drop out? How many people stay too long in the system? In her case, you also have to explain to people the university system in South Africa. You're going to predominantly work at... Okay, so the context, up there, the first thing, you've got to tell people, okay, we're looking at the higher education environment and we're actually looking specifically at universities of technology. And you can probably say why this is of such interest. And then you're going to bring in other little bits to convince your reader when they get down to that point 3 pages down that yes, it's really a problem. The students staying in there are wasting money or not realizing the potential. What's the consequences? And we can't address that. You probably also need to tell people about the fact that there are a number of factors that could possibly influence this, and you refer to some audience, to some authors which have spoken about it. You can talk about the fact that a number of these first year, second year students, are you going to still do the first, second year?
I'm directing undergraduates.
Okay.
And I'm looking at 8 management sciences in the...
But that's a sample. That's a sample. Okay? So she's directing at the undergraduates. She probably has to talk about the fact that a number of the undergraduate students at universities of technology are first generation students. In other words, these are students in whose family people don't quite understand what on earth they're doing here. For them it's difficult. Their friends don't understand it. Okay? We are putting you in the same position. We are trying to make you work together with other people that are doing a master's or doing a doctorate. If you sit there working, does your family fully understand why on earth you're spending time here? Can they truly support you? Can they really feel why you're sitting there night after night getting tense? We want to get people into a community where the same thing happens, where they have support. Now for students that are moving into a first generation environment, their buddies that did matric with them are out there partying. Maybe they don't have work, but they're certainly not sitting day to day. So you're starting and you have to argue all of these things. And there's enough references. So first thing, find out what must you tell your reader about. This is not a very long section. We don't want you to go for pages and pages and pages. From the moment you've got that hook, it must be logical, sharp, and you get to your research problem. Okay. Then you're trying to work out what to do. Now for some of you, I've already explained. If I read a paragraph, what do I want in a paragraph? One concept. If you're saying more than one, if you can summarize a paragraph into more than one sentence, it should be more than one paragraph. Every single paragraph should really go about one thing. So if I read 5 paragraphs, or say you've got 10 paragraphs in your introduction, okay, and I read the first sentence, and I read the second sentence for each of those paragraphs, it must tell a logical story. So very quick check on your writing, or whether it's logical. Take that single paragraph and make one sentence. What is this paragraph about? Then start from the beginning and see, because now you've got no references, you've got no detail. Do people follow? It's not only you, it's not only academic. Does any reader follow those sentences to get to your problem? If I tell them this, will they agree with me? Who of you have tried doing that so far? Just go through your writing. Try and see how many sentences do you need to describe a paragraph. The moment it's too many, you are confusing your reader. Okay? We are not trying to confuse our reader. We want our reader to think we're great and logical and brilliant. So we don't confuse them, and people get ugly when they get confused. So we want to tell them one thing and they must follow logically. So what you want in your introduction, you want to give the hook, and then you want to say, I'm doing this in universities of technology, that's my context. Okay. In South Africa, in the universities of technology, and you talk a little bit about that, and then you're telling them, this is really important because of the high fallout rate. There's a fallout rate and people being retained in the system. This is some of the possible reasons that could happen. If we don't know that, or this is some of the processes we've put in place, it doesn't fully work, something like that, something absolutely logic that in the end the problem is clear. Now, I'm probably not going to find references for any single one of those sentences absolutely as I've put it. Okay, now how do you go through? This is just an idea. It works for me, it could work for you. You start by putting together a table. Write your hook sentence at the top, and then write your context and the sentences that you must convince your audience about so that they will follow. So the first paragraph should be about this. You have already worked out those sentences because you've already told yourself what must you tell your audience about. Now you must just sort those sentences so that they make a logical sequence. First you put those sentences in, and then you write the problem, and then you give it to somebody to read. You give it to your supervisor to read. You give it to your colleagues to read. You give it to a number of people so that they know and they agree that this is logical. When somebody opens your proposal, they read this, they say, this is the greatest problem ever. Okay. This is the beginning. What you do then, and this is especially for people that really struggle to write, for every one of the statements, any one of those sentences, you now have to unpack. Okay. In order to tell people that students are staying too long in the system, what must I tell them about? I must tell them so many enter, so many come out, so many fall. So each one of those little things that I'm now listing is a separate sentence. Maybe 2 sentences, but it's separate points that I'm going to talk about. So when I put this paragraph together, I must talk about these things. And I've got my paragraph. And this is where the fun starts. Because each one of those little statements that you make, you need to find evidence for. Not every single one. Really not every single one. I'm not talking about references so that there's more references than anything else. But in order to convince your audience that this is where I start and this is really a problem, these guys say so, these guys say so, it's really a problem, it's substantiated, I'm trying to pepper these little statements with references. Some of that references will come from the academic journals that you've read, the body of knowledge. Which one of those statements can I support? Some of those will be empiric evidence. In other words, other credible sources. So it is important to work, so many people are dropping out at all universities of technology. I am quoting the statistics of the higher education, the Department of Higher Education. I'm quoting the World Bank. I'm quoting government speeches. Something about that sentence, there is somebody that agrees with me. Okay. Now what you do is at the last few sentences should be, in the literature, there are a number of people that look at this problem. However, they ignore these and these facts, or however the models that they've built together is not good enough. That's where you have to be very, very serious about your academic references if you're at a doctoral level. Say, I know there are models. It's very, very risky to say there's no knowledge about. Okay? The moment you say there's no knowledge about, some nasty person is going to find a little bit of knowledge. There's limited of knowledge. There's not a full understanding of the problem. Although these guys look at these factors, suggestions in other bits of literature say that we should consider this as well. So your last few sentences should be about why the body of knowledge is not sufficient to deal with the problem. Does this make sense? Who did I confuse now? Remember we will go through this over and again. We could not have this conversation at the beginning. We can have this conversation now because in each one of your minds, you can work out what you must do. So while you're busy putting together assignment 1, start with this table under the context. You can actually write a little bit about this. So start with your first idea of introducing the problem in your research, in the beginning, the first little bit of your research problem substantiating assignment 1. So that when your audience, when your supervisor reads this, they agree with you. And when we sit with you next week, we can go through that and we can see that this is really a problem, how close or how far you from this problem. Does your supervisor agree with you? And will other academic readers agree with you? And ultimately, first, will the department's research committee agree with you? And then will the faculty research committee agree with you? So that they will say, yes, we can actually go around and we can get this guy to enroll, to register that title. His or her proposal is good enough. And a lot is around this introduction.
Is it advisable that at this stage you discuss this with as many people as you can?
You discuss this, you discuss your logic certainly with as many people as you can. You discuss it with your supervisor. You read. If you have access to other people, you make sure that there's nothing in your logic that somebody can unpick. Your primary relationship is with your supervisor. Your supervisor will tell you where you need more evidence or where something else may exist. We can only guide you. I certainly do not know your area good enough to be able to guide a doctoral student there. Got an idea? I probably know quite a bit about it, but I cannot guide a doctoral student in there. So your supervisor is the person that will ultimately guide you. We can get you to the level that you can talk to them in a meaningful way. And that they don't have to repeat all these things over and over again to everybody, that we can get you to be effective around that. But that's all we can do. Your supervisor has to be convinced. And if your supervisor is convinced, then the likelihood is quite high that the departmental committee will be convinced, unless they've got some strange idea somewhere in there, which also always happen, and that your faculty would be convinced. So what we're doing here is we're playing devil's advocate in the way that we think somebody that's not particularly in your discipline, say in the rest of your department or in the faculty, can ask questions. And that's all we're doing. When we're going through that, we're playing devil's advocate. Your supervisor has to agree. Your supervisor has to sign off. This proposal can go forth. Department has to agree. Faculty has to agree. Then your proposal gets accepted. Okay. First, you must agree. So that's very important. And it must be very, very clear. There's always a danger that because you know your problem so well, that you are adding little bits into the argument. So you think you're giving us clue. You're saying something here, and then for 2 or 3 steps, we must make a mental jump because you did not tell us what that step is. Just because that step is absolutely logical in your mind and sometimes very logical in your supervisor's mind, doesn't mean that your reader will follow the same. So you must be very, very careful that you do not leave steps out. Don't jump. People don't like to have to do some kind of mental exercises when they read a proposal. They want to read it, they want to agree with it, must be logical, they can sign it off, it's not too much of an issue. Okay. So the reason that you have people check and other readers check is to make sure that you don't make those jumps. And probably any one of your friends, your wife, your husband, will look at it and say, I don't understand this step. How is this linked? What must be in between here? And then, of course, you will have to write the academic writing. You have to explain that academically and support that academically. But they can say that I can pick up a logic flaw here. Okay.
I don't know what's happening there. Just like trying to
They're not being nice to me. Okay. Now, remember, I've said over and over, there's nothing called a problem question. A problem is a statement or a phenomenon that leads to consequence. If I stop you, any one of you at any given time, and I ask you what's your problem, you should be able to make a sentence and say there are consequences. This is centered to what you do. Until you've got that thing solidly in your mind, you're not ready to go on. Okay. First thing, a problem is statement with consequences. Windows is not genuine.
Yeah, that's not our computer. It's their computer.
Okay, this is a problem. Windows is not genuine. This can be a big problem. Not a research problem, but not a good one. Doesn't want to, okay. Now, what is your title? There is a very, very clear link between your title and your problem. And if they're not aligned, there will be tension. People will say, your scope is not clear, what are you actually focusing on? My view is that your problem is the heart, your title follow, but this must be discussed. Okay. Your title, use exactly the same words as your problem. You can't, say people, and then in your problem statement you say people, and then in your title you talk about students. Or anything. Something, it must be exactly the same terms. A lot of confusion happens if you think that you're using terms that mean the same thing. But now in your reading you have found out that it's not exactly the same. So use the same terms. Your predominant protocol, this is the way that most people agree that a title should be formatted, but there are different people that have different ideas, is that you should have an action word or a descriptor. Now, TUT does not like you to say an investigation into. Okay? But if you're doing an exploratory study, it is probably necessary to say an exploratory study into. I'm building a model, a conceptual model. I'm developing a framework. What is it that you're doing? First thing. So the next is 2 or more variables. Remember, all your research, there's something between your variables. In her case, it is what factors influence students to stay in the system. Factors influence staying in the system. Okay, variables. And what is the relationship between these variables? You can't just say factors, students staying in the system, influenced by, or something. The influence by is actually the relationship between them. You have to clearly state factors influencing staying in the system. That is your 2 variables and the relationship. You may say what your case study is. I'm not sure how predominant that is here, but you may say a case study investigation, a phenomenological approach or whatever. And you may say a context. So you may state in universities of technology. Ultimately, if you have more than 10 words, you have a problem. The general guidelines is that a title should be less than 10 words. Now remember, your problem statement is 1 sentence. It's probably a lot more than your title. Same words, but you've got to pull it together like that. And you want to be as close as possible to your final title so that you don't have to go through the process of changing a title, because it's a process. It's not impossible, it's not that difficult, but it's a process. So if you don't have to go there, make your life easier, try to get it there.
Your supervisor won't want you to change your title because it means paperwork. That's all I can say.
It's paperwork. So you want to be as close as possible to your title, and hopefully if you've really engaged with your problem, as I believe you've done now, you can get to very close to your final title. Okay. Now, your aim of your research. Remember, you now have to, part of what you're saying, what your aim and your objective is your aim of your research. Your aim is very simple, to solve the problem. So it's the same thing, just phrased in a different way. I want to find out what these factors are so that, in order to. This study, and people don't really like the word this study, but we will solve the problem statement in order to. It's the only thing, that's the way aim works. It's not miracle, it's the same thing. So your aim, your problem statement, and your title is fully aligned. If you change your problem statement and you do not change your title or you do not change your aim, you have a misaligned situation. Very, very simple. Your objectives are to answer your questions. We'll get to that later. At this point, you can't yet write about your objectives until you've done assignment 3 and you're really comfortable about what you're going to do. So, but you've got your aim.